You awakened to the pale first rays of the sun filtering through narrow cracks in the adobe wall, the faded blue dawn casting a muted glow across the dust-layered floor. The air hung heavy and thick, saturated with the choking blend of sweat and dry sand that clung to your skin like a second layer. Your limbs felt weighed down, as though soaked in a glue that resisted every slight movement. Outside, the uneven beat of distant footsteps and nervous laughter threaded through the stillness, a relentless soundtrack marking another day under the curse. Today, as for weeks past, you knew you would be drawn again into the merciless circle of dance. A slow, unyielding cadence of shuffling feet scraping against hot sand, beneath the gaze of the sun, both pitiless and indifferent. You rubbed your palms across your worn garment, feeling the coarse fabric rough beneath your fingers, the texture a harsh contrast to the clammy moisture beading your skin. The faint scent of burnt incense curled in the stagnant air, mingling with the sour tang of dried sweat, a scent that always heralded the ceremony's arrival. Every breath you took was shallow and deliberate, the dust stirring faintly in the faint shafts of light that pierced the gloom. The walls, cracked and sun-baked, seemed to close in on you as if the very stones whispered reminders of the unending trial. Your eyes flickered to the narrow doorway, barely open to the world beyond. The village lay under a veil of fragile mist, soft and gray, stretching across the ramshackle huts and sun-bleached courtyards. There was a stillness here, different from the frantic energy that would soon consume the streets. The faint breeze carried the distant bark of dogs, a fragile thread tying you to the waking world. You flexed your toes against the rough floor, each grain of sand a small, stubborn resistance. The sky's color shifted imperceptibly, the pale blue turning to a softened gray, mirroring the exhaustion that spread like a slow tide inside you. If in your world a dead phone battery could summon a small storm of panic, here the flicker of life depended on meager fuel, a scant pile of wood shrinking by inches, each spark a tiny victory against the encroaching dark. Dreams of rest were as patchy and elusive as the smoke spiraling from a distant hearth that never seemed to swell. You drew a ragged breath and lifted yourself upright, your joints stiff, your head thick with weariness. The familiar rhythm of the village's morning began. Low murmurs, scattered footsteps, the scrape of worn sandals against stone and earth. Around a modest fire at the edge of the square, a few villagers shared warmth and fleeting smiles, their eyes glassy, yet carrying a muted defiance beneath the shared weight of the dance's cruel demand. The heat of the flames was small comfort, but a momentary balm against the relentless grind of despair. Then, as the sun edged higher, a subtle shift rippled through the community. The usual chorus of restless energy stilled abruptly. The dog's bark ceased like a breath held carelessly too long, and an unspoken glance passed between neighbors, eyes darkening with something unvoiced but heavy. You felt it too, the air thickening, the invisible eyes watching, waiting, as if the ground itself was poised on the brink of a breaking point. Before the next step, the next shuffle, you knew this day would be unlike any other. Hey, before Morpheus pulls you under completely, quickly check if you're still subscribed. For some, the button slipped away, and I don't want you to miss the next sleep stories. Take a soft like a pillow's caress. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your presence keeps this little corner of calm alive. Thanks for being part of it. You stepped beyond the threshold, the worn wooden door creaking softly as it moved. Outside, the thick veil of mist still clung stubbornly to the uneven rooftops and the cracked earth beneath your feet. Each breath you drew mingled quickly with the damp, cool air, sharp and unyielding. The village felt hollow, as if the silence itself was waiting, patient, watchful. Your sandals whispered against the rough cobblestones, uneven and brittle beneath you. The sensation was faint, like dry leaves skittering in a dull wind, but your every step seemed amplified in the muted morning. The scent of scorched wood lingered faintly from last night's fire, mixing uneasily with the dry, dusty aroma of clay and heat. The air was heavy with anticipation, and your skin prickled as though touched by invisible fingers, tracing slow patterns along your neck. You could hear the soft murmur of whispered prayers drifting from the central square, where the villagers were gathering. Their voices, low and rhythmic, blended with the occasional scrape of fabric and the rustle of tentative footsteps. You hesitated at the edge of the crowd, feeling the rough grain of stone beneath your hands as you leaned against the cracked wall. The village breathed around you, a rising tide of tension, wrapped in fragile hope. Slowly your eyes traced the path ahead, noticing the worn footprints pressed into the sand. They formed a meandering circle, deliberate and unbroken. The slow, steady beat of drums pulsed somewhere just beyond sight, a distant throb that vibrated through the ground and seeped into your bones. Each beat stretched time thin, elongating the moments between them into fragile threads of breath and silence. A faint breeze stirred, carrying the scent of time and an earthy undertone, sharp and grounding. It brushed against your face, a cool whisper that seemed to promise something just out of reach. You closed your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and scents wash over you. The steady murmurs, the ghost of incense, the slow, deliberate thump of heavy footsteps circling out of sight. Heartbeats slowed, matching the cadence, melding into the village's collective rhythm. When you opened your eyes again, the square was visible in shadowed depth. Forms moved with measured grace, feet scraping and shuffling in patterns etched by necessity and fear. The faces you glimpsed were taut and drawn, eyes shadowed beneath heavy lids, lips pressed into thin lines. They did not speak, their concentration absolute. Every movement was a study in care, an effort not to disturb the fragile equilibrium held by invisible threads. You took tentative steps closer, feeling the weight of burning sun yet to come pressing against the horizon. The air grew warmer with each passing heartbeat, the dryness curling around your tongue and settling in your throat like dust. A low sigh stirred among the gathered, a breath held and released, slowly, collectively, a quiet acknowledgement of what was to come. Your fingers traced the rough edge of a nearby bench as you edged forward, calculating each motion. The coarse wood scratched lightly at your skin, the texture familiar and grounding. Behind you, the faint clatter of a loose stone rolling drew your attention. But when you turned, there was nothing but the shifting mist and the hollow quiet that filled the spaces between sound. With slow resolve, you moved to join the circle. Your footsteps fell carefully, measured against the rhythm pulsing beneath the sand. Sweat pricked at your brow, the taste of arid heat lingering in your mouth. The smell of burnt herbs drifted closer now, a sharp tang that bit through the dust, filling your nostrils with a fleeting sense of clarity. Each breath was cautious, shallow, as though deeper inhalations might shatter the delicate balance around you. Around you, the others shifted with an almost mechanical precision. Their bodies carried the weight of countless repetitions, the solemnity of unspoken vows etched in their movements. You matched the steps, slow and deliberate, your feet tracing the uneven ground with care, avoiding the jagged stones that threatened to betray your balance. The rhythm held you hostage, each beat a pulse threading tension through your limbs and spine. Minutes stretched into an unfathomable length. Your muscles burned softly with exertion. The heat of the day snuck in through your skin like molten silk, sticky and unrelenting. You felt the dirt cling between your toes, dry and abrasive, grounding you to this place more surely than words. Despite the exhaustion pooling deep inside, you forced your body to submit to the slow, ritual dance, an endless loop weaving dread and hope in equal measure. The whispers caught at your ears again, faint and indistinct, but charged with urgency. You sensed the crowd's mood shifting. It was a collective intake of breath, a near imperceptible pause along the circle's edge. The dog's barks were replaced by the low scrape of a wooden staff against the stone, the sound jagged, biting into the silence like a sudden crack. Your heart quickened, but your body held taut, muscles coiled against disruption. The mist thickened, pressing cold fingers against your skin as the village seemed to hold its breath. Somewhere beyond the rim of sight, the first light of the harsh sun sliced through the fog, igniting scattered flecks of dust that danced lazily in the silent air. And then, from the shadows at the edge of the circle, a figure emerged, slowly, deliberately, their form blurring at the edges beneath the swirling haze. Your breath caught. The rhythm slowed, faltered, for this was a step no one had dared to take before. The village shifted uneasily, and all eyes turned, held fast by the quiet tension that draped the moment in unspoken peril. Ye felt it, an almost tangible crack in the relentless cycle, the faintest fracture in the slow, enduring dance, a whisper of change drifting on the hot, still wind. You held your breath as the figure stepped fully into the dim light that collapsed around the edges of the village square. The mist thickened again, coiling low over cracked stones and scuffed footprints, swallowing each slow heartbeat like a silent drum. You felt the weight of the gathered eyes, all drawn tight around this singular movement, as if the village itself was leaning in to watch a secret unfold. Your skin prickled under the cool haze, the contrast sharp against the slow heat rising from the earth beneath your feet. Each inhalation carried the mingled scents of burnt herbs and damp clay, twisting together in a ghostly dance that caught your throat with its bittersweet tang. The distant throb of the drums persisted, a slow pulse flaring faintly beneath the thick air, tethering you to the rhythm that defined this cruel day. Your feet shifted cautiously, reluctant to break the fragile balance held within the circle. The figure moved with deliberate grace, a slow, measured shuffling that seemed to stretch time itself. Every scrape of their sandals across the sand echoed in the hush, magnified by the collective caution that wrapped you all like a shroud. Your fingers curled against the rough stone behind you, clutching the coarse surface as if to anchor your wavering resolve. You caught the faintest flicker of movement from the figure's hand, a subtle gesture that passed unnoticed by many, but etched sharply onto your nerves. The cramped muscles along your spine tensed, sensing a prelude to something unsaid, a shift beneath the surface of an already taut day. The villagers remained rigid, eyes fixed ahead, breath shallow and synchronized with the unrelenting beat that threaded through muscles, sinew, and bone. The sun lingered just below the horizon now, a pale promise of warmth struggling through the mist's oppression. The sky faded from soft gray to a bluish hue, as though the day itself hesitated to begin, caught in the taut suspension between shadow and light. A faint breeze stirred suddenly, carrying with it the dry whisper of crushed herbs and the sharp tang of distant smoke rising from a fire you could no longer see. The scent brought a flicker of something faintly familiar, a fleeting sense of comfort that slid quickly beneath the skin and settled like a memory. You closed your eyes briefly, tasting the dusty air on your tongue, the dry warmth collecting behind your ribs. Your heartbeat slowed, attuning a little more to the rising cadence of the drums, a sullen, persistent assertion that this was no ordinary morning. When your eyes opened again, the figure had stopped moving. Their outline wavered in the thickening mist, a blurred shape standing just beyond the circle's edge. The tension intensified, wrapping around your chest with steady pressure, squeezing air from your lungs in slow, deliberate waves. Around you, the villagers shifted minutely, a nearly imperceptible exhale passing between them, like a shared secret or a silent warning. Your hands trembled as you lifted them from the stones. The air was dense and electric now, heavy with anticipation and the unsaid. Every sound was magnified. A leaf stirring against a doorway, the faint scrape of fabric sliding over skin, breaths caught and released in rhythm with the drums that refuse to falter. The circle's slow dance began anew, feet once again meeting the rough earth with measured patience. You felt the sand yield beneath your steps, gritty and unforgiving, each grain a weight tethering you to the moment. Your muscles burned softly, tight and unyielding as you forced your body to submit to the unbroken chain of shuffles and slides. Sweat pricked along your brow, salty and sticky, mingling with the dry dust coating your throat. The figure stood unmoving, a dark sentinel against the pale light, their presence a reminder of something on the cusp, unending pattern. You sense the village leaning toward this quiet rupture, a collective breath held taut like a thread ready to snap. Your mind blinked across the hazy veil of exhaustion, searching for a foothold in the fragile quiet. Suddenly, a subtle shift in the air rippled through the crowd, a nearly silent disturbance. Somewhere behind you, the soft clatter of a loose stone rolling was swallowed immediately by the shifting mist. The drums faltered for the briefest instant, a break so slight it might have been imagined. But your instincts cried out against the stillness that followed. Your gaze darted to the figure once more, noting the slow, deliberate tilt of their head. The veil of fog flickered in the early light, revealing a flash of something glinting, perhaps a trinket, a shard of glass catching the sun's suppressed rays. A chill crept along your spine, the familiar shroud of dread settling in deeper, dark and soft, like a silk thread wrapped too tightly. Voices rose then, low murmurs of supplication and whispered prayers, fragile as the closing folds of a withered flower. The villagers' faces, strained and pale in the muted dawn, tightened with resolve. You swallowed hard, the dryness clinging stubbornly to your throat, as your feet moved in time once more, bound to the ritual, both unbearable and necessary. The figure took a step forward, thin soles scraping the rough stone, with a whisper loud enough to sever the thick silence. All movement slowed, a collective pull, as if the entire village leaned into the moment. Your breath caught between your ribs, a fragile thing, held captive by the stillness that unfurled like smoke around you. Your heartbeat thundered in your ears, a slow, deep drum that matched the relentless rhythm beneath your feet, but carried its own urgent insistence. You knew the day's slow dance was nearing a turning point, one forged in silence and shadow rather than sound and fury. And then, as the first sunbeam pierced the mist with sudden clarity, you glimpsed the unblinking eyes of the figure, dark, sharp, full of secrets whispered on the exhale of centuries. The rhythm held, but something fragile had broken. A choice waited just beyond the circle, cold and waiting to be made. You stood frozen for a heartbeat longer than you had intended, the dust swirling slowly at your feet like a phantom tide caught in a half-forgotten motion. The village held its breath with you, the collective weight of every pair of eyes pressing against your skin, a silent gravity pulling tight around your chest. The air seemed to thicken, the mist curling low and stubborn, a pale net straining against the rising sun's stubborn reach. Your muscles trembled as the figure remained still, a dark smudge hovering against the cracked stones and faint outlines of sweat-darkened footprints. There was something unmistakable in their measured poise, a deliberate patience that stretched the space between heartbeats into a suspended moment of uneasy calm. Your gaze dropped for the briefest of seconds, tracing the worn edges of your sandals, the rough fibers fraying from years of use. Each thread whispered a quiet endurance, mirroring your own. The shifting mist whispered low against your skin, cool and clammy, creeping up your arms like a silken ghost. The scent of charred wood sharpened, cutting through the stagnant earthiness. The hint of dry time now more distinct, an olfactory thread weaving through. The morning's canvas. The scent brought a flicker of distant memory, a remnant of warmth amidst the chill. Around you, the circle resumed its slow, unyielding dance. Feet scrape the cracked earth in lethargic arcs, deliberate and cautious, as if the ground itself might fracture beneath the weight of each step. Your own feet moved with hesitant grace, limbs heavy but obedient to the rhythm. The heat was slow to rise, a smoldering promise on the horizon just out of reach. Sweat prickled at the nape of your neck, salty and persistent, mixing with the dry grit that clung stubbornly to the back of your throat. A faint murmur rippled through the crowd, so soft it might have been a breath rather than a sound. You picked up the subtle exchange of glances, a ripple of unease threading through the villagers like a thin, unwelcome wind. You felt the tension coil tighter, a silent engine revving slowly beneath the measured movements, slow and relentless. The drums beat on, relentless and slow. Each strike, a soft thud vibrating through your feet, pulling the muscles taut, threading nerves with a quiet insistence. Your breath deepened, steady and slow, trying to coax the wild pulse of apprehension back under control. The coarse fabric of your garment grazed your wrists as your fingers curled slightly, grounding you to this moment, this place. A subtle shift in shadows caught your eye, barely perceptible, a flicker at the edge of vision. The figure moved, just fractionally, a deliberate tilt of the head that almost went unnoticed. Your pulse throbbed in warning, muscles tightening reflexively, while the mist thickened again, swallowing the edges of your vision in a soft, gray caress. The village held firm in stillness, the dance slowing to a fragile balance between threat and ritual. You could hear the faint scrape of sandal leather, the hesitant slide of rough soles against stone and sand. The sound echoed softly, like a secret whispered in a crowded room. Your hands brushed briefly against the grainy bench behind you, the roughness anchoring your wavering resolve. Time seemed to stretch like the slow unfurling of smoke from a distant fire, delicate and insistent. A bead of sweat traced a sluggish path down your temple, cool against the dry heat of your skin. You swallowed, tasting the dust on your tongue, the faint bitterness of long-held breath. The scent of burnt herbs grew stronger, curling through the air like a slow, twisting flame, mingling with the deeper earthiness. Your senses flickered on the brink, aware, alert, yet locked inside the ritual's hypnotic grasp. The circle's edge hummed with tension, a nearly imperceptible shift that made your skin prickle anew. Somewhere near, you thought you caught the soft hiss of whispered prayers, fragile as cobweb threads, fragile as the faintest sparks fading in dying embers. The villagers' faces were ghostly in the morning haze, their expressions taut with quiet determination and exhaustion. Lips pressed thin, eyes lowered in concentration. Your feet moved in slow obedience to the rhythm, toes curling against the gritty warmth of the earth, heels sliding out softly before setting down again. Each step was a lesson in patience, a measured surrender to the unbroken cadence that wove dread and deferred hope. The air was thick with silent warnings, the kind that travel without words or sound, curling tightly beneath your ribs. A sudden, cold whisper of wind brushed past your cheek, stirring dust and loose leaves in scattered fluttering dances. It carried something unfamiliar, an unmistakable crack of change slipping through the cracks of the village's long endurance. The drumbeat faltered for a fraction of a second, a hesitation that spoke volumes in its absence. The figure at the circle's margin shifted more boldly, stepping forward now into clearer view. The mist stirred and parted hesitantly, revealing sharp angles and shadowed planes, a face half hidden in the opaque dawn. The faint glint of a small trinket caught the tentative sun, a shard of something broken, carried with deliberate care. Your breath caught, the slow rhythm punctured by a spike of sudden, quiet alarm. The villagers around you tensed as one, an unspoken collective drawing sharper breath, holding fast to the threads of control, slipping just out of reach. You felt the thick pulse of momentary silence an electric thread tugging at frayed nerves, binding you all still, waiting to see what would come next. Your limbs ached with slow exhaustion, every muscle taut, but bound in the ritual's relentless tide. The weight of unspoken choices pressed heavy, coalescing in the pit of your stomach as the sun's first clear beam burst suddenly through the clouded mist. It struck the figure standing ahead, illuminating eyes sharp and unwavering, dark and full of solemn secrets that reached back beyond the heat-frozen sands and whispered centuries. Time held its breath once more, and in that sharp silence, the slow, brittle fracture you sensed, so long hovering at the edge of the dance, finally cracked open wide. You remained still, the dust swirling tendrils around your feet, like slow flames licking at dry paper. The village held its collective breath, a fragile stillness tethered to the figure waiting ahead. A shadow carved sharply against the waning mist. Every detail stretched taut in your senses. The dry crackle of sand shifted underfoot, the ghostly weave of incense smoke curling lazily toward a pale sky just beginning to pull itself toward morning. Your eyes traced the hesitant outlines of the village square, caught between blur and clarity, as if the memory of this place wavered between here and somewhere just beyond reach. The cracked stones, scarred by countless footsteps, seemed almost to pulse, marking the slow heartbeat you had come to know as the day's relentless rhythm. The murmurs around you softened into a humming tide, voices melding into the earth's hum, shadows swaying like grasses caught in a desert breeze. Your breath curled softly against the cool air, mingling with the scent of burnt wood and dry thyme. A delicate thread stitching you momentarily into something larger, though the weight in your chest refused to lighten. The heat remained a promise at the horizon, elusive as a whispered secret. With tentative care, you shifted your weight, the coarse fibers of your garment scraping against your skin, grounding you in the moment's gravity. The figure ahead remained motionless, the low light catching the faint glint of something held loosely in their hand, a fragment of glass or metal, unknown and sharp, its quiet shimmer slicing through the gray. The mist trembled subtly, thickening, then thinning like hesitant breath, wrapping the village in a cloak of suspended time. Every footfall around you obeyed the slow cadence, a dance measured in patience and unspoken dread. A single bead of sweat traced a languid path down your temple. The dry grit pressing at the back of your throat pulled your focus inward, mingling with the faint rustle of cloth and the soft scrape of sandals drawn carefully across ancient stones. The rhythm of drums throbbed low and steady beneath this quiet, a distant pulse threading its way through sinew and bone, keeping your muscles clenched in solemn obedience. Your fingers brushed the rough grain of wood beside you, the coarse surface rough against your skin's warmth, an anchor amid the haze. The circle's slow arc felt endless yet finite, a fragile barrier between memory and whatever lay just beyond the mist's edge. You felt the words unspoken, the glances flickering like candle flames, low and wary. The villagers moved as one, collected fragments of will, holding the fraying fabric of their resolve. The figure's head tilted slightly, a gesture so small it might have been a trick of your weary mind. Yet it rippled through your muscles, tightening nerves, waiting to uncoil. The sun crept higher, pale and reluctant, its light threading golden fingers through the curtain of mist, illuminating grains of dust floating in invisible currents. For a flicker, the world seemed reduced to breath and heartbeat alone. A crackling shift broke the stillness, a loose stone skittering over the cobblestones, coming to rest like a whispered secret abandoned. Your heart leapt, muscles bidding you freeze, hold the tension in a fragile cage. The drums faltered briefly, an omission in the relentless thump like a stammered word. The village shared this silence, a breath caught on the edge of fear and something new, a fissure widening imperceptibly beneath years of repetition. Your gaze snapped back to the figure, the faint sparkle. In their grip deepened, catching the reluctant light just as the scent of smoldering herbs grew dense and bitter, winding around your senses. The heaviness pressing against your ribs felt almost alive, a slow tightening that pulled breath shallow and steady. Somewhere deep, a current of ancient caution hummed beneath the pulse of ritual. Shadows lengthening within your skin, you exhaled quietly, feeling the moment thicken as feet resumed their measured scrape, the dance beginning anew with deliberate slowness. Each movement pressed against the heavy air, a study in restraint and quiet endurance. Your body obeyed, muscles dull with exhaustion, yet tuned finely to the rhythm of sun-bitten stones beneath your sandals. The coarse dust clung, dry and abrasive, grounding you in a reality that offered no pause. Around you, faces turned dim beneath furrowed brows, eyes flickered with uncertain fire, lips pressed tightly as if to hold back words that might unravel all. The murmur of whispered prayers mingled with the faint rustle of shifting cloth, and you caught the sharp tang of sweat mixed with earth, that complex scent folding past memory to something raw and immediate. The slow dance wove on like a spell, weaving dread and persistence into a fabric just strong enough to hold the village together. The heat climbed a little higher, a molten promise pooling across rooftops and fallen dust. Your own breath deepened, slow and deliberate, drawing in dry warmth and the scent of burnt wood, the way one might clutch a half-forgotten lullaby. Then, as the sun slicked fully above the rim of the village, an unvoiced tension slackened just for a flicker. The figure at the edge of the circle shifted once more, stepping forward, each movement a slow, deliberate echo that scattered the morning's fragile equilibrium. The glint in their hand grew sharp and undeniable, catching the sun's first direct beam and splintering light across the cracked stones. You felt a cold thread trace down your spine. The long-dreaded moment had slithered close. The village stilled, the dance faltering into an uneasy stillness as eyes fixed on the emerging choice. Your breath tangled in your throat, slow and thick like the smoke curling over distant fires. And in that suspended moment, the slow fracture beneath years of ritual cracked open. The path unwound ahead, silent and waiting beneath the glaring sun. You stood frozen as the sun climbed higher, its pale fingers unraveling the thick coils of mist, scraping faint gold over cracked stones and the scattered footprints worn into the earth beneath your feet. The village held its breath, a fragile silence pressing close, broken only by the slow, relentless beat of distant drums. An unyielding pulse that had woven itself into your bones since dawn's fragile light first touched the clay walls. The figure at the circle's edge remained motionless, a shadow wrapped in the half-light. The faint glint of the shard in their hand, catching the sun's morning breath and fracturing it into sharp, errant flashes. Your skin prickled beneath the mist's slow retreat. The dry heat of the coming day pressing gently against your back like a promise, as frail as a moth's wing, but persistent. And your fingers clenched tightly around the rough grain of the bench behind you, grounding you in this fragile threshold between endurance and change. The air around you pulsed with a tense expectancy, a web weaving through the gathering like invisible threads. Your feet, still rooted to the uneven ground, prickled with the coarse weight of dirt and the sting of dry sand caught between your toes. The faint scent of burnt thyme thickened, curling in lazy spirals that snaked toward your nose, sharp and earthy, cutting through the stagnant heat. It clung fiercely, like dust in a desert storm, binding you to this moment, this ritual that stretched endlessly before you. With slow, measured movements, your heart sinking with the distant drums, you shifted your weight from one foot to the other. The earth felt brittle beneath you, each grain reluctant but stubborn, a fine resistance like the stiff fabric scraping gently against your wrists. Your breath, slow and calculated, painted faint clouds in the chilly morning air, the taste of dry grit lingering on your tongue. The circle's rhythm encased you, binding each step into a somber dance, a ballet of survival and quiet dread. Around you, the villagers moved as one, their steps tracing familiar paths worn smooth by years of repetition. Every scrape of sandal against stone pushed the moments further apart, each beat a soft thud reverberating in your legs and spreading through your chest like a slow burn. Faces turned away, eyes lowered beneath furrowed brows, as the weight of expectation lay heavy on every shoulder. The brittle hum of anxious prayers drifted faintly, muffled beneath the call of the desert wind, slipping through cracked doorways and shuttered windows. You felt the slow creep of sweat, tangy and warm, tracing delicate rivers down your spine, mingling with the dust that coated your skin in a stubborn veil. The sun's gentle rise drew long shadows, stretching twisted fingers across sun-baked walls. Cooling heat seeped softly into your bones. It was an unspoken companion, distant, impartial, watching as the circle spun ever onward, the day's slow heartbeat echoing through the sand. A sudden shiver ran through the gathering, subtle and shared, as if the earth itself had taken a cautious breath. The figure shifted, once, and again, each motion a carefully weighed tremor that fractured the morning's quiet with the faint scrape of worn leather soles against stone. Your muscles tensed involuntarily, every nerve taut under the thickening tension, the pulse within your ears swelling to drown out the faint stirrings of wind and whispered hope. Your eyes, narrowed against the sun's growing warmth, caught the faintest flicker of movement in the figure's hand. The shard, a jagged sliver of glass or metal, twinkled with lethal delicacy, sliding slowly between calloused fingers that neither hesitated nor trembled. The shimmer seemed to call out, sharp and cold, slicing through the haze like a threadbare razor. You swallowed the dry lump clinging to your throat, your breath shallow but steady, the weight of choice pressing firmly in the pit of your stomach. Around you, the rhythm wavered, each step bending in cautious defiance of an invisible fault line deep beneath the village's worn stones. The circle seemed to shudder as if the very soil beneath was unsure whether to hold firm or give way. Your heart battered in your ribs, a slow, relentless drum, mingling with the distant cadence. But beneath that steady thump was the quiet staccato of a fracture, sharp and insistent, growing louder by the breath. You blinked slowly, the world reduced to a tight focus on the figure's darkened eyes, bright and unyielding, gleaming in the soft morning light. The worn creases of their face told stories of ancient endurance, shadowed fears, and secrets carefully guarded beneath that measured calm. Their gaze seemed to pierce the rhythmic veil that clad the village, seeking out something unseen but deeply feared. It was a look tied with weight, of inevitability, of something poised to slip beyond the tenuous threads of ritual. Around you, the murmurs swelled into a tentative current, a fragile undercurrent breaking through the muted hush. The scent of smoked herbs thickened abruptly, heavy and pungent, spiraling upward like the ashes of a long-smothered fire reignited. The pounding of your footsteps faltered, each breath hesitant, your body straining to hold the stillness that seemed to snap ever closer to breaking. The circle contracted slowly, a tightening no one voiced, footsteps shortening as the weight of what was to come settled like simmering metal on exposed skin. Your limbs ached beneath the heat and exhaustion. Every muscle throbbed with both fear and an iron resolve grown from too many sunrises just like this. The dust at your feet swirled softly in lazy eddies, as if stirred by the faintest breath of wind, shadows blurring the edges of your vision in slow waves. You tightened your grip on the coarse wood behind you, grounding yourself against the rising tide of a question no one dared speak aloud. The figure twisted slightly, raising the glinting fragment higher, slowly, deliberately, until it caught the light with fierce clarity, splintering the first true sunbeam into shards of blinding revelation. A cold spark ignited deep within you, trailing a slender coil of dread curling upward through your chest, whispering of things long buried beneath dust and time, between the measured steps of the dance. And the silence, thick with held breath, the village waited, fragile and poised on the brink of a choice that could unravel all. Then, as the sun broke free from the mist's last grasp, the village exhaled as one, and the slow fracture finally spoke. A whisper held in the crackling air, a movement frail as ashes, and yet impossible to ignore. The path split silently ahead, waiting for your voice to step forward and decide which way the slow dance would turn. You stood still, the slow sun climbing higher, lifting the mist like a fragile veil retreating from secrets half forgotten. The figure's shadow, dark and still, stretched long across cracked stones, a quiet monument carved from uncertainty and silent defiance. The faint gleam in their hand still caught the hesitant light, scattering shards of cold clarity across the dusty earth. Every breath you drew weighed heavy in your chest, thick with the taste of dry earth and whispered warnings. Your footsteps, normally measured and sure, felt suddenly heavier, tethered to the thickened air that wrapped around you like a shroud. The coarse fibers of your garment scratched softly against your skin as you shifted your weight, the rough stone beneath your fingertips grounding you against the swell of uneasy anticipation that pooled within. Around you, the slow circle pressed on, feet scraping in endless repetition, like the slow tick of some unseen clock counting down toward an unknown moment. The faint murmur of prayers rippled through the gathering, soft as a breeze brushing against sun-baked clay and dry leaves. The scent of burnt thyme curled upward again, sharp and pungent, weaving through the rising heat like smoke from a distant fire. You closed your eyes briefly, tasting the bitterness of held breath and the faint, lingering pinch of sweat on your lips. When you opened them, the village around you seemed caught between shadow and light, in a place suspended, waiting. Your gaze flicked to the figure once more. They shifted slightly, just enough for you to catch the slow, deliberate movement of their fingers tightening around the shard. The glint caught the sun's first direct glow, fracturing light into a shattered bloom that spilled across the cracked stones. A thread of cold slid down your spine, the tension unfolding like a taut wire, ready to snap. The rhythm of the drums wavered, each beat stretching a little longer, falling like distant thunder muffled beneath the fabric of the morning. Your muscles tensed in response, tightening with the silent urgency that hummed beneath every measured step. Collective breath of the village seemed held hostage, the dance pausing in a moment drawn taut. Between dread and reluctant hope, a whisper stirred at your ear, impossible to catch, like a secret slipping through the thin crack of a closing door. The dry dust shifted beneath your sandals, brushing softly against your skin, inconsequential yet sharp in the hush. Your eyes narrowed against the spreading light, searching the figure's face, now half lost in the swirling haze. Their eyes, dark, unwavering, held stories you could almost feel humming beneath the surface. Ancient stories braided with exhaustion and quiet rebellion. The scent of scorched wood thickened, winding through the crowd like smoke spiraling upward from a hidden ember. You felt the heat touch your cheeks now, a slow warmth pooled beneath your skin, both comforting and heavy. The coarse grain of the earth pressed stubbornly beneath your toes, forcing each step into careful surrender. Your breath deepened, slow and deliberate, tethering you to the rhythm pulsing beneath the sand and stone. Around you, the villagers shifted slightly, a ripple of unease threading through their movements, a collective tightening like a held-in breath before a sudden gust breaks free. Faces turned with eyes heavy and unconvinced, lips pressed thin beneath the ashen sky. There was an unspoken question lingering between them, fragile as the threadbare fabric of the ritual itself. You steadied yourself against the rough bench behind you, tracing the grain with worn fingers until the coarse texture steadied the tremor running low through your arms. The drums resumed their slow pulse, each beat a tether pulling you deeper into the dance's relentless embrace. Your limbs moved obediently, feet scraping again the ancient ground in tired arcs, the scent of dry earth and smoldering herbs weaving through your senses. A flicker of movement caught the corner of your eye, the figure shifting once more, stepping forward with a measured grace that sliced the rising tension like a blade drawn slow and deliberate. The shard in their hand caught the growing sunlight, scattering shards of raw brilliance that painted fractured patterns across cracked clay walls. Your breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in your chest as the weight of the moment settled heavily around you. The slow dance faltered, footsteps faltering along the tight circle, the village caught in a heartbeat of frozen time. Your skin prickled under the growing heat, dry grit collecting stubbornly beneath your nails. The smell of sweat mixed with burnt herbs, complex and raw, curling like smoke around your thoughts. Every sense heightened, every step loaded with the gravity of what was about to unfold. Your fingers clench the coarse fabric of your garment, grounding you as the figure lifted the shard higher, catching the sunlight full on its fractured edge. The glint splintered across the circle, scattering light like shattered glass and fractured truths. The village held its breath, a silent weight pressing on your lungs, a stillness richer than any word. You swallowed hard, heart pounding in slow, dragged beats that echoed the rhythm of the drums, now breaking free of their steady cadence. An uneven pulse, stitching uncertainty into the dawn. The figure's gaze locked onto yours for the barest moment. Dark eyes sharp and unyielding, carrying the weight of decisions long deferred. And then, as the sun reached its zenith over the cracked earth, the shards slipped cold through their fingers, clattering lightly against the stones. A subtle sound, small and fragile, yet it echoed through the silence like a fractured promise. The dance shattered. The path before you lay open, jagged and uncertain, waiting for the first step. The slow climb of the sun stretched languid fingers over the village, peeling back the lingering mist with hesitant light. You remained rooted where you stood, the rough stone pressing hard beneath your fingertips, grounding you as the world shifted quietly around you. The figure at the circle's edge had not moved, yet their stillness seemed charged, like the fragile calm before a long-awaited storm breaks its silence. Each breath you drew whispered against the dry air, a delicate wisp trailing through the scent of scorched wood and crushed thyme that folded itself into the morning's fabric. The heat was lurking just beyond the horizon, a swollen promise pressing soft warmth against your back, slow and insistent. You felt your pulse syncopate with the distant drum beats, steady, unyielding, a tether binding your every muscle to the rhythm weaving itself across the cracked earth. The circle pulsed, feet scraping with lethargic precision, stepping warily along the worn path etched deep by endless repetition. The coarse dust clung stubbornly between your toes, dry and abrasive as broken glass, pulling your senses down into the earth. Your calves sang a dull ache, muscles taut beneath the sun's gentle rise, as you forced each step to carry weight that felt both ancient and deeply personal. The coarse fabric of your sleeve grazed your wrist, rough and familiar, stirring a grounded sensation amid the swirl of unease that clung to the village like a second skin. Around you, muted whispers sifted through the crowd, a soft, trembling undercurrent threaded with fragile prayers and silent hopes. The faces near you were pale and drawn, eyes hidden beneath creased brows, lips pressed tight, as if to hold back words better left unsaid. Shadows clung beneath heavy lids, casting long lines over softened cheekbones, all pulled taut by the weariness of 1,000 slow days like this. There was a gravity here, a collective silence laden with anticipation and dread, folding the village into a delicate shell just waiting to crack. Your gaze drifted, fingers tightening on the bench's rough grain, toward the figure who stood with deliberate stillness at the circle's margin. The shard, cradled loosely in their hand, caught the sun's frail light, splintering it into sharp, shifting shards that fractured the quiet space around them. You could almost feel the electric thread of tension weaving outward, pulling the village's nerves taut like freshly stretched sinew. That shimmer of cold intent whispered secrets against your skin, a slight chill gliding slowly down your spine, settling deep within the hollow of your chest. The drums beat on relentlessly, but the rhythm quavered now. Stretched moments where the steady pulse faltered, rippling through your limbs as if the village itself held its breath in hesitation. Your heart hammered, slow and sure, a thick drum echoing beneath the practiced shuffle of feet. Sweat traced slow rivers down your neck, salty and insistent, mingling with the dust that coated your skin in a stubborn, dry veil. In the placid stillness that strained the fragile threads tethering everyone there, the shards shifted in their grip, glinting with cold fire, and your breath caught, not in panic, but in an undeniable pull of recognition that the moment veered toward an irrevocable edge. Your eyes flicked to the faces circling you, each one a mirror of restrained tension and whispered doubts. The murmurs became more urgent, a low swell of invisible currents rippling through the crowd. The scent of smoldering herbs twisted heavier now, hanging dense like thick smoke, curling around unseen embers. You felt the heat keen against your skin, the sudden dryness settling heavier in your throat, pressing you deeper into the ancient ritual's embrace. Your muscles ached, limbs weary but fiercely obedient to the rhythm that held them hostage. The ground beneath shifted quietly with each measured step, the sun climbing higher and painting long, harsh shadows that stretched like warnings over cracked walls and dust-slicked footprints. The slow dance continued, a fragile ballet of survival, balanced on whispered hopes and carried fears. Then, with chilling clarity, the shard slipped. It fell, cold and sharp, clicking against the stones with a quiet finality that shattered the tension into 1,000 fractured fragments, scattered across the village's fragile heart. Time fractured with the sound. The dance stumbled, breath caught in locked chests, as all eyes turned toward the splinter, now resting on the cracked earth. The silence that followed was palpable, vast as the empty sky, heavy with the weight of unspoken questions and choices long deferred. Your skin prickled, every sense heightened, as you felt the slow unraveling begin. The figure's eyes locked with yours for a fleeting moment, forged in the space between heartbeats. The village seemed poised on an unseen precipice, balance wavering like a fragile flame threatening to be extinguished by the faintest breath of wind. And as the sun blazed fully into the blue sky above, scorching and indifferent, you realized the slow fracture had finally come undone. The path ahead lay open, jagged and uncertain, waiting for the first step that would lead the dance away from the endless circle and into the unknown. The slow sun climbed steadily, peeling back the mist with a cold, patient light that washed over the cracked stones and weathered footprints beneath your feet. The village held its breath, a fragile hush wrapped around the gathering, like linen draped too loosely but never quite falling. The figure at the circle's edge, the keeper of the broken shard, stood unmoving, a silhouette framed. In the softening dawn, their presence a quiet anchor amid all the tension and waiting. Each breath you drew felt heavier now, thick with the dry scent of dust and scorched time, carrying the weight of all the moments that had come before and the promise of what was yet to unfold. Your fingertips curled gently on the rough grain of the wooden bench behind you, grounding you as your eyes traced the wavering outlines of the village square. The slow rhythm of the dance still pulsed faintly in the background, a worn heartbeat of shuffling feet and muted drums. But the air between the steps now hung stretched, like a thread pulled taut, ready to break. Around you, faces turned pale under heavy brows, eyes shadowed with fatigue, but lit with a flicker of something new, an ember of hope, fragile, yet stubborn. The figure shifted imperceptibly, lifting the shard just a fraction higher. The cold sliver caught a stray sunbeam, splintering light across the dust-speckled earth like fractured glass, sharp but strangely beautiful. A quiet tension hummed beneath the crowd's lips. No one dared to speak, yet the collective breath curled tight in their chests, poised between relief and disbelief. Slowly, the relentless circle loosened its grip. You felt the heaviness in your limbs begin to ease, a gentle unwinding from the tight coil of exhaustion and dread. That same familiar draft of dry air pressed softly against your skin, but now it carried a cooler promise, an invitation to pause, to breathe without the weight of endless repetition. The slow dance was no longer a yoke, but a memory folding away quietly, like a well-worn shawl settled on an old chair. In the distance, beyond the rim of the village, the first birds called out, their songs fragile bursts of life that softened the sharp edges of the morning. Somewhere, a dog barked once, tentatively, hesitantly, as if testing this new world before joining in. The villagers began to shift, eyes meeting with cautious smiles, their movements less rigid, more human. You caught a glance exchanged at the circle's edge, a silent acknowledgement, a step towards something unknown but welcomed. Your feet no longer trailed the endless circle, but found steadier ground. The grainy sand beneath your sandals felt less like a trap and more like a foundation. The warm sun slipped higher, casting long shadows that stretched and melted into the earth. The sharp smells of burnt herbs softened, replaced by a fresher breeze carrying hints of wildflowers and distant rain. The air seemed to open up, space for endings, yes, but also for beginnings, gently folded within closure. You let your breath deepen, each inhale drawing in the cool clarity of this moment. The thrumming rhythm of the drums faded into a distant heartbeat, a fading echo of a burden lifted. Time itself seemed to slow, a soft pulse in the quiet spaces between thoughts. The village exhaled, a collective release carrying years of ritual, weariness, and whispered prayers into the wide blue sky. Turning your gaze once more to the figure, you saw a flash of something beneath their steady calm. A delicate surrender, not defeat, but acceptance. The shard was laid gently on the earth, its sharp edges softened by the dust and quiet reverence. The gesture held weight beyond words, the breaking of a cycle, the letting go of a burden long borne. With that single motion, the slow fracture that had hovered invisibly across the years snapped free, unraveling the knot that had bound the village in relentless repetition. The dance was broken, not with chaos or fury, but with a fragile grace that rippled through every heart watching. Around you, the villagers began to disperse slowly, footsteps lighter, laughter maybe just a breath away. The heavy circle gave way to scattered movement, hands reaching for one another, supportive touches that whispered healing and quiet joy. The sun climbed, bathing the village in a gentle warmth that promised rest after so long of relentless striving. You took a final deep breath, tasting the clean air mingled now with the faint scent of crushed time and soft earth. Your limbs relaxed, muscles loosening from their long vigil, and a profound stillness settled over you. The world felt flatter somehow, less burdened, and for the first time in many dawns, the horizon opened wide enough to cradle a future unmarked by the slow, merciless dance. As you stepped away from the circle's edge, the cool breeze brushed softly across your skin, carrying the weight of silence relieved. The sun's rays spread wider, warming the earth and your skin alike, like a long overdue embrace. For now the village rested, no longer captive to the grinding rhythm, but living, breathing, and waiting, not for the dance to start again, but for life, holy and unmarked. And with a last glance back, you sensed the story folding into itself, like dusk closing upon quiet meadows, gentle and whole. The slow dance was over. A soft peace, like a whispered lullaby, settled softly over the land, inviting dreams to come and carry you gently away.